Some people are born into families where dreams are encouraged, where parents clap at every small achievement and tell their children they can become anything they want. But not everyone gets that kind of beginning. Some people are born into silence, into struggle, into homes where survival matters more than dreams. He was one of those people. He grew up in a small town that most maps forgot to mention. The kind of place where nothing much ever happened. And nobody expected anything much from anyone. His father left when he was just 4 years old. One morning the man was there, and by evening he was gone. No explanation. No goodbye. Just an empty chair at the dinner table, and a mother who cried quietly when she thought her son was asleep. His mother worked harder than anyone he had ever known. She cleaned houses during the day and washed dishes at a restaurant at night. Sometimes she would come home so tired that she would fall asleep still wearing her work clothes. He would pull a blanket over her and turn off the lights, even though he was just a small boy who should have been the one being taken care of. Money was always tight. There were nights when dinner was just bread and butter. There were winters when the heat barely worked and they would sleep in the same bed just to stay warm. But his mother never complained. She would smile at him and say that one day things would get better. He believed her because he had no other choice. When he was 7 years old, something happened that would quietly change his entire life. His mother took him to a thrift store one Saturday afternoon. She needed to find him a winter coat because his old one no longer fit. While she searched through the racks, he wandered around the store looking at all the random things people had thrown away. Old books, broken lamps, toys missing pieces. And then he saw it. Sitting in the corner, covered in dust, was an old keyboard. It was not in good shape. Some of the keys were cracked. The stand was missing. The power cord looked like it had been chewed by a dog, but to him, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. He had seen people play piano on television. He had heard music floating out of churches on Sunday mornings. Something about those sounds always made him stop and listen, made him feel things he could not explain. And now, here was this keyboard, sitting alone like it was waiting for someone to find it. He asked his mother if they could buy it. She looked at the price tag. $5. She looked at her son. She saw something in his eyes that she had not seen in a long time. Hope. She bought it for him. That night, he sat on the floor of their small living room and plugged in the keyboard. Half the keys made no sound at all. The ones that worked sounded strange and out of tune. But he did not care. He pressed the keys one by one, listening to each note like it was a secret being whispered just to him. He had no teacher. He had no music books. He had no idea what he was doing. But every single day after school, he would sit with that broken keyboard and try to make something that sounded like music. He would listen to songs on the radio and try to copy what he heard. He would make up his own melodies, little tunes that lived only in that tiny apartment. His mother would sometimes stop and listen from the kitchen doorway. She never said much, but there was a look on her face. A look that said she knew her son had found something important. Years passed. He got older. The town stayed the same. Small. Quiet. Forgettable. By the time he was a teenager, he had taught himself to play in ways that surprised even him. His fingers moved across the keys like they had always belonged there. He could hear a song once and figure out how to play it. He could sit down with no plan at all and create something beautiful out of thin air. Music had become his language. The one place where he felt free, but nobody around him seemed to notice. Or if they noticed, they did not care. At school, he was invisible. He was not popular. He was not athletic. He was just the quiet kid who sat in the back and never raised his hand. When he told a classmate once that he wanted to be a musician, the boy laughed and said he should focus on getting a real job. When a teacher asked the class about their future plans, he stayed silent. He had learned by then that dreams were not something you shared out loud. Not in a place like this. His father never came back. Not even a phone call. Not even a letter. Sometimes he wondered if the man even remembered he had a son somewhere out there, but he tried not to think about it too much. Thinking about it only made the music sound sad. After high school, there was no money for college. no scholarships, no opportunities knocking at the door. So he did what everyone in that town did. He got a job. He started working at a warehouse on the edge of town, loading boxes, unloading trucks, 12-hour shifts that left his whole body aching. His hands, the same hands that could create such beautiful sounds, became rough and calloused from lifting heavy things all day. He was 24 years old now, still living in that same small town, still unknown, still unheard. But every night, no matter how tired he was, he would come home and play. He had saved up enough money to buy a better keyboard. Nothing fancy, but the keys all worked, and the sound was clear. He would sit in his tiny apartment long after midnight and let his fingers move across the keys. He would close his eyes and forget about the warehouse, forget about the bills, forget about all the people who had ever doubted him. In those moments, he was not a nobody. He was exactly who he was meant to be. He started recording himself on his phone, just short videos of him playing. He posted them online, hoping that maybe someone out there would listen. Maybe someone would hear what he heard when he played. But the internet is a big place, and he was just one small voice in an ocean of millions. 3 followers. That is all he had after months of posting. 3 people who were probably bots. 0 comments. 0 shares. 0 signs that anyone in the world knew he existed. His coworkers found out about the videos one day. Someone had searched his name as a joke and found his page. They laughed about it during lunch break, called him a dreamer, asked him when his world tour was starting. He smiled and said nothing. But inside, something cracked. Just a little. His mother still believed in him. She would call him every Sunday and ask him to play something for her over the phone. She would always say the same thing when he finished. "That is beautiful. Son, do not ever stop." But it was getting harder not to stop. He was 24 years old, working a job that was slowly breaking his body, playing music that nobody wanted to hear, watching life pass by like a train he could never catch. Some nights, he would sit at his keyboard and wonder if any of it even mattered. Maybe his coworkers were right. Maybe dreams were just distractions for people who could not face reality. Maybe he should sell the keyboard, forget about music, and just accept that this was his life. But then his fingers would touch the keys, and that first note would ring out in the silence of his apartment. And something inside him would whisper the same thing it had been whispering since he was 7 years old, standing in that thrift store, looking at a broken keyboard covered in dust. Do not give up. Not yet. Not ever. So he kept playing, alone, unheard, waiting for something he could not name. He did not know it yet, but everything was about to change. Life has a strange way of moving. Sometimes years can pass and nothing changes. The same routine, the same faces, the same feeling of being stuck in place while the rest of the world moves forward without you. And then one ordinary day, without any warning at all, something happens. Something so small that you almost miss it. But that small thing ends up changing everything. For him, that day came on a Tuesday. It started like every other day. He woke up before the sun, made himself a cup of cheap coffee, drove to the warehouse in his old car that made strange noises every time he turned left. He spent the next 12 hours doing what he always did: lifting, carrying, sweating, watching the clock and waiting for the shift to end. By the time he got home, his back was hurting and his hands were sore. He heated up some leftover rice, ate it standing in the kitchen, and thought about going straight to bed. But something pulled him toward his keyboard instead. It always did. No matter how tired he was, he could never go to sleep without playing at least one song. He sat down and played for about an hour. Nothing special, just him and the keys and the quiet of his apartment. When he finished, he picked up his phone to check the time. That is when he saw it. A message. From someone he did not know. He almost ignored it. He got spam messages all the time. People selling things, fake accounts, nonsense. But something made him open this one. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fate. He would never know for sure. The message was short. It was from a woman who said she worked for a small charity organization in Nashville. They were hosting a fundraiser event in 5 days. A dinner to raise money for programs that helped sick children in hospitals. They had hired a pianist to perform during the evening, but that person had canceled at the last minute due to a family emergency. They were desperate to find a replacement. She explained that a friend of hers had stumbled across one of his videos online. She had watched a few of them. She thought he was talented. She wanted to know if he would be interested in performing at their event. He read the message 3 times. Then he read it again. This had to be a mistake. Things like this did not happen to people like him. He was nobody. He had 3 followers online. He had never performed in front of anyone except his mother. He was a warehouse worker from a forgotten town who played piano alone in his apartment at night. People like him did not get invited to play at events in Nashville. But the message was real. The woman was real. The opportunity was real. He did not sleep that night. He just sat on his bed and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts he could not slow down. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately. This was what he had been waiting for his entire life. A chance. Just one chance to be heard by someone, to prove that all those years of playing alone in the dark had meant something. But another part of him was terrified. What if he was not good enough? What if he got there and froze? What if people laughed at him the way his coworkers did? What if this one chance turned into his greatest embarrassment? He thought about the event. A charity dinner. That meant wealthy people, important people. People who had probably been to real concerts and heard real musicians. What would they think when they saw him? A nervous guy in cheap clothes who had never performed anywhere before? He thought about his keyboard at home. It was decent, but it was nothing compared to a real piano. He had only played a real grand piano once in his life. At a church when he was 15. What if his fingers did not know what to do on a professional instrument? He thought about all the things that could go wrong. And there were so many things that could go wrong. By morning, he had almost convinced himself to say no. To delete the message and pretend it never happened. To go back to his safe little routine where nobody expected anything from him and he could never disappoint anyone. But then he thought about his mother. He thought about that Saturday afternoon when she had only a little money in her pocket but still bought him that broken keyboard. He thought about all the nights she came home exhausted but still smiled when she heard him playing. He thought about every Sunday phone call where she told him not to give up. What would she say if she knew he had gotten this chance and thrown it away because he was scared? He knew the answer. And it was not something he could live with. So he picked up his phone. His hands were shaking. His heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his throat. He typed out a reply to the woman. Yes, I will do it. He sent the message before he could change his mind. The next 5 days were the longest of his life. He could barely focus at work. His mind kept drifting to the event, to the performance, to everything that was waiting for him. His supervisor yelled at him twice for being distracted. He did not care. For the first time in years, there was something bigger than this warehouse. Something worth thinking about. Every night after work, he practiced until his fingers ached. He played the songs he knew best. He played new songs he had been working on. He played the same pieces over and over until they were perfect, or at least as perfect as he could make them. He did not tell anyone at work what was happening. He could not handle more jokes, more laughter, more people telling him he was wasting his time. But he did tell his mother. He called her 3 days before the event. His voice was nervous as he explained everything. The message, the charity dinner, the chance to perform in Nashville. There was silence on the other end of the phone. For a moment, he thought the call had dropped. Then he heard something he had not heard in a long time. His mother was crying, but these were not sad tears. These were tears she had been holding back for years. Tears of hope, tears of pride, tears of a mother who had watched her son struggle and dream and never give up. And who was finally seeing a door open for him. She told him she always knew this day would come. She told him he was going to be wonderful. She told him to play from his heart and forget about everything else. When he hung up the phone, he sat in silence for a long time. The fear was still there. But now there was something else too. Something stronger. Belief. The night before the event, He could not sleep at all. He lay in bed and watched the hours pass on his phone. 2 in the morning. 3. 4. His mind would not stop running through everything that could happen. He thought about all the years that had led to this moment. The broken keyboard in the thrift store. The nights playing alone while the world ignored him. The videos nobody watched. The laughter from people who called him a dreamer. The endless waiting for something, anything, to change. And now it was here. The chance he had prayed for. The moment he had imagined 1,000 times. In a few hours, he would drive to Nashville. He would walk into a room full of strangers. He would sit down at a piano and do the only thing he had ever truly known how to do. He would play, and for the first time in his life, people would actually be listening. The sun came up slowly that morning. He watched it through his window, golden light spreading across the sky. He took a deep breath, then another. This was it. He got dressed. He grabbed his keys. He walked out the door, and he drove toward the biggest moment of his life. The drive to Nashville took almost 3 hours. He had never driven that far alone before. The highway stretched out in front of him like a gray ribbon that never seemed to end. His old car made those strange noises again, and every time it did, his heart would jump. The last thing he needed was to break down on the side of the road on the most important day of his life. He had left early because he was afraid of being late. He was afraid of everything that day. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that his knuckles turned white. The radio was off. He could not handle any noise except the sound of his own thoughts. And those thoughts were loud. What are you doing? You do not belong there. You are going to make a fool of yourself. Turn around. Go home. Forget this ever happened. The voice in his head would not stop. It had been whispering to him for days, but now it was almost shouting. Every mile he drove, the voice got louder. Every minute that passed, the fear grew stronger, but he kept driving. He did not know what else to do. When he finally reached Nashville, he felt like he had entered a different world. The buildings were taller than anything in his town. The streets were busy with people who all seemed to know exactly where they were going. Cars honked, lights flashed, everything moved fast. He felt so small. He followed the directions on his phone until he reached the venue. It was a beautiful old building, with tall windows and stone columns out front. There were people walking inside, dressed in suits and elegant dresses. Expensive cars were parked along the street. A man in a uniform stood at the door, greeting guests like they were royalty. He pulled his car into a parking spot across the street and turned off the engine, and then he just sat there. He could not move. His body felt frozen. His breath was shallow and quick. Through the windshield, he watched more people arrive. They were laughing, smiling, comfortable. They belonged here. They had probably been to 100 events like this. He looked down at himself. He was wearing a suit he had bought at a second-hand store 2 days ago. It was the nicest thing he owned. But it was not nice enough. Not for a place like this. The sleeves were slightly too long. The color was a little faded. There was a small stain near the bottom that he had tried to scrub out but could not. He looked at his shoes. They were old, worn. The kind of shoes a warehouse worker wears, not a musician. He looked at his hands. Rough. Calloused. The hands of someone who lifted boxes for a living. Not someone who played piano for important people. Everything about him was wrong. He did not fit here. He never would. The voice in his head spoke again, quieter this time, almost gentle. You tried. That is enough. Nobody will blame you if you leave. Just start the car and drive home. Go back to your life. At least there, you know who you are. He reached for the keys. His fingers touched the cold metal. One turn and the engine would start. One turn, and he could disappear. Nobody inside that building knew what he looked like. Nobody would even notice he was gone. The woman who had invited him would find someone else. The event would go on without him. The world would keep spinning, and he would go back to being invisible, safe, unknown. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw his mother. He saw her standing in that thrift store, holding a broken keyboard with a $5 price tag. He saw her tired smile, after long nights of work. He saw her sitting by the phone every Sunday, waiting to hear him play. He heard her voice, the same words she had said to him so many times over the years. "Do not give up, son. Not ever." He opened his eyes. His hand was still on the keys. The engine was still off. The building was still there, waiting. He thought about what it had taken to get here. 24 years of life. 17 years of playing piano. Thousands of nights alone with his music. Hundreds of videos that nobody watched. Years of being laughed at, ignored, forgotten. All of that had led to this moment. This one moment. If he drove away now, what would he have left? He would go back to the warehouse. Back to the same routine. Back to playing alone in his apartment. While the world slept. And every night for the rest of his life, he would wonder. He would wonder what might have happened if he had just been brave enough to walk through that door. He could not live with that. The wondering would destroy him slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. So he made a choice. He took his hand off the keys. He opened the car door. He stepped out onto the sidewalk. His legs felt weak. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. But he started walking. One step, then another, then another. The man at the door looked at him as he approached. For a moment, he was sure the man would stop him, would ask him what he was doing here, would tell him he was in the wrong place. But the man just smiled and opened the door. He walked inside. The room was even more beautiful than he had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft light everywhere. Round tables covered in white cloth filled the space, each one decorated with flowers and candles. A stage sat at the front of the room, and on that stage was a piano, a grand piano, black and shining and perfect. He had never seen anything like it. It was the kind of piano he had only dreamed about. The kind that real musicians played. The kind that made sounds so pure they could break your heart. And tonight, he was supposed to play it. People moved around him, talking and laughing, finding their seats. Nobody looked at him. Nobody noticed the nervous young man standing alone by the entrance, staring at the piano like it was something from another world. A woman approached him. She introduced herself as the one who had sent him the message. She was kind, warm. She thanked him for coming on such short notice and showed him where he could wait until it was time to perform. He nodded and tried to smile, but his face felt stiff. His mouth was dry. He could barely remember how to speak. She led him to a small area behind the stage. There was a chair and a glass of water. She told him he would go on in about 30 minutes, after some of the guests had finished eating. Then she left him alone. 30 minutes. He sat down and stared at the wall. His mind was completely blank. All the songs he had practiced, all the notes he had memorized, everything seemed to have vanished. He could not remember a single melody. Not one. Panic started to rise in his chest. What if he sat down at that piano and forgot everything? What if his fingers refused to move? What if he opened his mouth and nothing came out except silence? He closed his eyes again. He took a deep breath, then another. He thought about why he was here. Not for fame, not for money, not to impress anyone. He was here because music was the only true thing he had ever known. The only thing that had never left him. The only thing that made sense when nothing else did. He was not here to be perfect. He was here to be heard. Somewhere on the other side of that curtain, 60 people were eating dinner and making small talk. They did not know who he was. They did not know his story. They did not know about the broken keyboard or the warehouse or the years of silence. But they were about to find out. He heard footsteps approaching. A voice called out to him. It was time. He stood up. He straightened his second-hand suit. He walked toward the stage, and with every step, the fear began to fade. In its place, something else was rising. Something that had been waiting inside him for 17 long years. He was ready. He stepped onto the stage and the world seemed to slow down. The lights were brighter than he expected. Warm and golden. They fell on him like a spotlight he had never asked for. For a moment, he could not see anything except the glow. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw the room spread out before him. 60 people. maybe more. They were seated at round tables, dressed in their finest clothes, surrounded by flowers and candles and crystal glasses filled with wine. Some of them glanced up at him. Most did not. They were busy with their conversations, their laughter, their lives. To them, he was just background, entertainment they had not asked for, noise to fill the silence between courses. He walked toward the piano. Each step felt like it took forever. His shoes made soft sounds against the wooden stage. His heart was beating so loud, he was sure everyone could hear it. His hands were trembling at his sides. He tried to steady them, but they would not listen. And then he reached the piano. He had never touched anything so beautiful in his entire life. The wood was smooth and dark, polished until it shined like a mirror. The keys were perfect, white and black, waiting in silence, waiting for someone to bring them to life. He sat down on the bench. It was cool beneath him. He adjusted his position. He placed his feet near the pedals. He rested his fingers above the keys, not yet touching them, just hovering there like a bird about to land. The room continued around him. People kept talking. Forks clinked against plates. Someone laughed at a joke he could not hear. Nobody was paying attention. Nobody cared. He closed his eyes. In the darkness, he found something familiar. He found the small apartment where he had played alone for so many years. He found his mother's voice on the phone every Sunday. He found the broken keyboard from the thrift store, the one that had started everything. He found every late night, every ignored video, every moment of doubt and pain and hope. All of it was inside him. All of it had led to this. He opened his eyes. He took one final breath, and then he began to play. The first notes were soft. So soft that only the people closest to the stage could hear them. A gentle melody, like raindrops falling on a window, like a whisper in an empty room, like a secret that had been waiting years to be told. But even those soft notes had something in them. Something real. Something true. A woman at a nearby table stopped talking mid-sentence. She turned her head toward the stage, her eyebrows lifted slightly. She set down her fork. He kept playing. The melody grew. It swelled and rose like a wave building in the ocean. His fingers moved faster now, finding notes he did not even know he was looking for. The music poured out of him like water from a broken dam. Years of silence, years of waiting, years of playing alone in the dark. All of it came flooding out through his hands. More people stopped talking. One by one, conversations faded. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Heads turned. Eyes found the stage. Found him. He did not notice. His eyes were closed again. He was not in that room anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere the music had taken him. A place where nothing existed except the sound and the feeling and the truth of what he was playing. The song he played was one he had written himself. He had created it during the hardest year of his life. The year he had almost given up on everything. The year the loneliness had nearly swallowed him whole. He had poured all of that pain into this piece. Every note carried a piece of his story. Every chord held a memory. And now, for the first time, other people were hearing it. The room had gone completely silent. Not a single voice. Not a single sound except the piano. 60 people sat frozen, caught in something they had not expected. Something they could not look away from. A man in an expensive suit leaned forward in his chair, his dinner forgotten. A young woman pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes wide. An older couple reached for each other's hands beneath the table, holding on like the music might sweep them away. He played on. The melody shifted. It moved from sadness into something else. Something brighter. Hope. The feeling of sunrise after the longest night. The belief that things could change, that tomorrow could be different, that all the pain might someday mean something. His fingers danced across the keys. Fast and sure. Every note exactly where it needed to be. He was not thinking anymore. He was not afraid anymore. He was just playing. Pure and free and alive. This was what he had always dreamed of. Not the room, not the people, not the fancy clothes or the chandeliers or any of it. Just this. The feeling of being completely lost in music. The feeling of saying everything he had never been able to say with words. The song began to slow. The notes grew softer again. Gentler. Like a storm passing, leaving calm in its wake. Like a story reaching its final page. Like a heart finding peace after years of searching. He played the last note. It hung in the air, pure and clear, ringing through the silent room. Then it faded, and there was nothing. He opened his eyes. For a moment, he thought something had gone wrong. The silence was so complete, so total, that he was sure he had made a terrible mistake. He looked out at the room, at all those faces staring back at him, and his heart began to sink. Then he saw the woman in the front row. She was crying. Tears were running down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Smiling like she had just witnessed something she would never forget. And then she started to clap. One person. Alone at first. The sound of her hands coming together echoed through the room. Then another person joined. And another. And another. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Not polite applause. Not the kind you give because you are supposed to. This was something else. This was people rising from their chairs. This was people wiping their eyes. This was 60 strangers united by something they had all felt together. He sat at the piano, unable to move, unable to breathe. He had imagined this moment so many times, but nothing had prepared him for how it would actually feel. Someone shouted something. He could not hear what. The applause kept going. It would not stop. People were looking at him like he was someone. Like he mattered. Like he had just given them a gift they did not know they needed. Finally, he stood. His legs were shaking. He gave a small bow, not knowing what else to do. The applause grew even louder. He walked off the stage in a daze. His mind could not process what had just happened. It felt like a dream. The kind you are afraid to wake up from because you know reality could never be this good. Backstage, the woman who had invited him was waiting. She was crying too. She hugged him and said thank you. Over and over. Like he had done something incredible. Just by being himself. But the night was not over yet. A man approached him. He was tall. Well-dressed, with gray hair and kind eyes. He had been sitting near the back of the room during the performance. He introduced himself calmly, but there was something in his voice, an excitement he was trying to contain. He explained that he worked in the music industry. He was a producer. He had come to this event as a favor to a friend, not expecting anything special. But what he had just heard on that stage was something he had not heard in a very long time. Talent. Real talent. The kind that could not be taught or bought or faked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. He held it out with a steady hand. There were only 5 words. But they were the 5 words that would change everything. I need to hear more. He took the card. His fingers were still trembling. He looked at the name printed on it, then back at the man. For 17 years, he had played alone. For 17 years, nobody had listened. For 17 years, he had held on to a dream that everyone told him was impossible. And now, standing backstage at a charity event in Nashville, holding a business card from a stranger who believed in him, he realized something. The dream was not impossible. It had only been waiting for one chance. The days after that night felt like living inside a dream that refused to end. He called the number on the business card the very next morning. His hands were shaking so badly he had to dial twice. When the producer answered, he half expected the man to say it had all been a mistake, that he had given his card to the wrong person, that he did not actually want to hear more. But that is not what happened. The producer remembered him. Remembered every note he had played. He asked if they could meet in person to talk about his music, his story, his future, a future that suddenly seemed real in a way it never had before. They met at a small coffee shop in Nashville 3 days later. He wore the same second-hand suit because it was the only nice thing he owned. The producer did not seem to notice or care. He just wanted to listen, so he talked. For the first time in his life, he told someone his whole story. the absent father, the hard-working mother, the broken keyboard from the thrift store, the years of playing alone, the warehouse job, the videos nobody watched, all of it. When he finished, the producer was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would stay with him forever. Your story is your music, and your music is something the world needs to hear. Within a month, he had signed a small contract. Nothing huge, nothing that would make him rich overnight. But it was real. It was official. Someone believed in him enough to put it in writing. He quit his job at the warehouse on a cold morning in early winter. His supervisor looked at him like he was crazy. His coworkers made the same jokes they always made. But this time, their words did not sting. He smiled, shook a few hands, and walked out the door for the last time. He called his mother that night. When he told her the news, she did not say anything at first. He thought maybe the call had dropped. Then he heard her crying. Deep, heavy sobs that she could not control. She had waited so long for this moment. They both had. When she finally caught her breath, she said only one thing. I always knew, son. I always knew. The next year was the hardest he had ever worked. Harder than the warehouse. Harder than anything. He spent long hours in recording studios, learning things he had never learned before. He worked with musicians who had been doing this for decades. He made mistakes. He struggled. There were days when he doubted himself all over again. When the old voice in his head came back and whispered that he did not belong here. But he kept going. He had come too far to stop now. His first album came out on a quiet spring day. It was a collection of every song he had written alone in that tiny apartment. Every melody that had kept him company on the darkest nights. Every piece of his heart that he had poured into the keys when nobody was listening. The album did not explode overnight. There was no sudden fame, no millions of fans appearing out of nowhere. But slowly, something began to happen. People started to find his music. They shared it with friends. They wrote messages telling him how his songs had touched them, helped them, made them feel less alone. One listener said his music had gotten her through the hardest year of her life. Another said he played his album for his dying father, and it brought them both peace. A young boy wrote to say he had started learning piano because of him. These messages meant more than any award ever could. He read every single one. Sometimes he cried, sometimes he laughed, but he always remembered where he had come from. He never let himself forget. As the months passed, more people discovered his music. He started performing at small venues, then bigger ones, then concert halls he had only seen in pictures. He stood on stages in cities he had never visited, playing for crowds that grew larger each time. But no matter how big the rooms got, he always played the same way. Eyes closed, heart open, lost in the music like he was still that boy in the tiny apartment, playing on a broken keyboard while the world slept. 3 years after that charity dinner in Nashville, he found himself standing backstage at one of the biggest concert halls in the country. Thousands of people were waiting on the other side of the curtain, thousands of strangers who had bought tickets just to hear him play. He thought about how impossible this would have seemed just a few years ago. The warehouse worker from a forgotten town. The invisible dreamer with 3 followers online. The boy whose father left and never came back. That boy had never imagined standing here. But here he was. Before he walked on stage, he did the same thing he did before every performance. He took out his phone and looked at a photo. It was a picture of his mother, taken on the day she came to see him perform for the first time. She was sitting in the front row, tears streaming down her face, smiling wider than he had ever seen her smile. She had worked her whole life so he could have a chance. And now, he was living that chance. Every single day. He put the phone away. He took a deep breath. And he walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted him was like thunder. Thousands of hands clapping. Thousands of voices cheering. It was overwhelming in a way he would never get used to. But he did not let it go to his head. He never did. He sat down at the piano. The crowd grew quiet, and he began to play. Years later, interviewers would ask him the same question over and over. What kept you going through all those years of silence? How did you not give up when nobody believed in you? His answer was always the same. I was not playing for applause. I was not playing for fame, or money, or recognition. I was playing because music was the only honest thing I had. The only thing that never lied to me. The only thing that stayed when everything else left. I just needed one person to listen. One chance to be heard. That is all any of us really need. One chance. He never forgot the charity event that had started everything. Every single year, without fail, he returned to Nashville to perform at their fundraiser. He never charged them a penny. He played for free, for the sick children the organization helped, for the woman who had taken a chance on an unknown musician with a few forgotten videos online. It was his way of giving back, his way of remembering, his way of saying thank you to the moment that had changed his life. Some nights, after big concerts in famous halls, he would go home to his apartment. It was nicer now. Bigger. In a better part of town. But he still had that old keyboard. The one his mother had bought for $5 at a thrift store when he was 7 years old. It sat in the corner of his living room. Cracked keys and all. He could afford any piano in the world now. But he would never get rid of that keyboard. It was where everything had begun. It was proof that dreams do not need permission to exist. They just need someone stubborn enough to keep believing. On quiet nights, when the world was asleep, he would sometimes sit at that old keyboard and play. Just for himself. Just like he used to. And in those moments, he was not famous. He was not successful. He was just a boy who had found something beautiful in a dusty corner of a thrift store and had never let it go. The music had saved him. And now, maybe, it was saving others too. That was enough. That was everything. And it had all started with one chance. Just one.